comme ça. Hello, dear audience and dear viewers. May I get your attention now as we are having a very special guest here in our Martin Center sideline event. She is the President of the European Parliament and a member of the Executive Board of the Wilfried Martin Center for European Studies. I will now give the floor to the President of the European Parliament and our moderator, Strategic Coordinator and Senior Research Officer at the Martin Center, Federico Ottavio Reo, who are going to discuss about a European vision of democracy. Federico, you may take the floor.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for that concise and effective introduction. I also welcome Madam President on the platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are delighted to have you. Well, a European vision of democracy, we could not have hoped to discuss it with anyone better, the foremost representative of European democracy. I would like to start, the situation somehow obliges us with a question that is not a happy one. There is a democratic country in Europe that is now fighting a war of survival against an authoritarian power in our eastern neighborhood, the eastern neighborhood of the EU. Of course, I'm referring to Ukraine. And we all feel that these events have a broader and deeper significance than the merely military strategic constellation. And you have been the first leader of an EU institution to support the Ukrainians to go to Kiev. So my first question inevitably has to be, what is the meaning of the Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, for European democracy and for you as President of the European Parliament?
Well, first of all, we have been talking about one thread throughout this whole 2 days at this Congress of the European People's Party, is that there is a world that is before the 24th of February and the world that is after the 24th of February. And I would never have imagined when having been elected and being given this responsibility of presiding the European Parliament that I would have to talk about war, but that we'd also talk about a different dimension of Europe, and that all the discussions, whether it is about energy, environment, migration, defense, treaty change, would all happen against a backdrop of an invasion by an autocratic regime into, as you said, a democratic country that is fundamentally fighting for our values that we all share.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much. Yesterday we had a beautiful singing performance in support of Ukraine, and the singer said, Rostana, the victory of Ukraine is the victory of freedom, and I think we all agree to that.
Yes, they are fighting our war.
Indeed. Now, one of the issues that this war has brought to the fore is the fact that as long as authoritarian powers remain on the European continent, I'm referring to Russia, but also to Belarus to an extent, democracy in Europe is not completely safe. And many in the EPP have been working also with Russian civil society, trying to foster democratic development in that country. And therefore, my second question to you will be, do you see a democratic Russia that is no longer a threat to its neighbor in the future, maybe at a point in the future, joining the European community of democracies? Not the EU, of course, but a European security space that is pacified and democratic. And how can the EU contribute to that outcome?
I'll start with the last part of your question about how the EU can contribute, and that is simply by not allowing for this war to continue. There are talks of appeasement, there are talks of saving face, there are talks of calling it, let's say, an end to the war where Ukraine is not around the table. For me, that is not only unacceptable, that would be a monumental failure of the European Union, and also a moment where we have a chance to send a message that we didn't do in 2008, we didn't do in 2015, when we thought Putin would stop with Georgia, when we thought Putin would stop after the invasion of Crimea. We see that he did not stop with the razing to the ground of Mariupol and Kharkiv, and let's not kid ourselves, he will not stop. And that means that, of course, our ultimate aim needs to be that the regime is brought down and that we can truly look at the possibility of having a democratic Russia that functions in a way that we can operate in the same space. You mentioned security. I would say peace first. I would say democracy, justice, liberty for everyone, including those who do not agree with those who take the decisions, because the intimidation and the oppression of opposition activists, as we have seen with Alexei Navalny, is not anything that we would ever share. But in a situation where that would one day be possible, and it is our role to work towards that, then of course, the larger the space of peace is, the better for Europe and the world.
Thank you, Madam President. Maybe one last question on the global situation. I mean, we saw that democracy in Europe is not safe if democracy is not safe in Europe's neighborhood first, but there is a global problem in a way. Many see a new Cold War dawning on the horizon, and the defining criteria in which that divide the blocks somehow seem to be, according to many, it is revisionist authoritarian powers, such as China and Russia on the one hand, and on the other hand, Western democratic powers, the US and Europe, first and foremost, but also others, Australia, South Korea, and so on. Do you see that happening, and what will be the impact on Europe, which is traditionally very uncomfortable with confrontation and polarization and prefers, cooperation also at an international global level?
Well, first of all, I think it was high time, as we did, to revitalize our transatlantic relations. When we talk about North America, the United States, with President Biden and his administration, but also with Prime Minister Trudeau and his administration, Canada and the US are vital partners, not only economically, but also in joining us in our quest for global peace and security. And in this moment, that was never truer. We need to become more interdependent, because at the moment we are too dependent on unreliable, menacing countries that are not democratic and can blackmail us at a moment's notice. The European Parliament has been very strong on this. We need, first of all, a proper defense policy. Europe needs to no longer rely on other global powers to solve its challenges or to address or find solutions when Europe looked away. We have looked away for far too long. You mentioned the Eastern neighborhood, our countries whom neighbor Russia in the European Union, that have found not only, let's say, comfort, but military security in NATO, but also in the European Union. And as we can see also with the decision of Finland and Sweden to do precisely what Putin tried to avoid doing by invading Ukraine. So that was a gross miscalculation that we have to ensure is the costliest mistake that Putin has ever made. When we talk about the more global scenario, I think Europe needs to take the lead. I think we need to identify new alliances that can be set up, not only politically. I talk about digital innovation, green transition, economic competitiveness, technological advancement, research. We are huge in creative industries. We have dedicated so many projects and financial possibilities for them to be used in the recovery period after the pandemic. Let's focus again on making Europe a global player and a global leader, because frankly, if we don't do it, nobody else will.
Thank you very much. I think everybody in the EPP and here can share your plea for European global leadership.
I hope beyond the EPP and the whole Parliament. I can tell you the European Parliament is extremely united on this.
That's excellent. Let's get a little bit closer to home. We have looked at the external threats, let's say, to democracy, but many feel that there are also there is a sense of democratic malaise inside our Western democracies. We all remember the assault on Capitol Hill 1.5 years ago in the US, but of course closer to Europe we also have serious issues, things like populism, like identity politics, rising inequalities, technological transformations that we haven't seen in generations. So I guess my question to you is then, Do you see risks also internally for the stability of European democracies? And what can the EU and particularly the European Parliament, what is maybe the EU and the European Parliament doing to address those issues?
Well, first of all, I think what has happened after the 24th of February is an emergence of a new sort of parliamentary diplomacy and democracy. President Zelensky addressed the European Parliament as the first parliament, and after which I invited 160 parliaments across the world to do what we had done, because the message that we received from President Zelensky and his colleagues that were echoed when I visited Kiev exactly 2 months ago was, let's talk to each other. Let's make sure that we understand each other. Let's make sure that elected parliamentarians across the world who are being told by their public, look, let's open up. These are Ukrainians, Europeans, Belarus, you mentioned earlier. We have countries who want to join Europe. Let's open the door for them. Different paths, different realities, but let's not close doors, because this is all what Europe is about. It's about hope. It's about giving the young generation a reason to vote. And looking forward, when we look at, yes, frustrations that exist, gaps that we talk about, we've been talking about gaps for so long, and we have a golden opportunity in 2024 for the European elections. We have 88 million 15 to 29-year-old young people who are eligible to vote for the European Parliament elections. How are we going to give them that reason to vote and be pro-European and not be ashamed to say it? Be prepared for criticism, acknowledge our mistakes, our failures, but also prove that if it were not for Europe during the pandemic, we would not have had vaccines for all, we would not have had medical care for all, we would not at the moment have the economic, unprecedented support for everybody in the European Union, and this is where democracies can be vulnerable, and we need to be vigilant. The European Parliament is extremely strong on that governments need to be held accountable, that democracy remains the most important tool that we have, but let's not underestimate how vulnerable in a world of disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, easy populist narrative can take hold of people who have nowhere else to turn to. So my take is, let's identify what is lacking, let's work on our successes, never forget, my parents have always taught me this, where you came from, and never stop to stand up for what you believe in. If we can present this, and I am proud to be part of a political family that has always stood for this, then I'm convinced we can win against anyone trying to destroy the project.
Thank you, Madam President, also for mentioning the youth, which is a very important...
In the Year of the Youth, 2022.
In the Year of the Youth. One experiment on which the youth was, by design, overrepresented, and that came to an end recently, is the Conference on the Future of Europe, of course, which ended about a month ago. And I would say it's the most interesting, maybe, democratic experiment in the last few years, an interesting democratic innovation through which people could engage directly in deliberative bodies and give suggestions about the future of Europe. So I guess my question to you is, you are the president of the only directly elected European institution. How do you assess this experience? What are the lessons that you draw from it? What is the prospect of stabilizing the structures within the EU?
So I would go back 20 years to when I first started attending EPP congresses, but also in being very active in the convention at the time. And I would take issue with the word overrepresented. First of all, we need to stop thinking about youth as being different to us or saying that their time will come. This European Parliament, at the moment, 60% of its members are new, and the average age has already dramatically decreased from when I joined 9 years ago. I look forward to that age continuing to decrease with a very pro-environment, pro-European, constructive, centrist, liberal and Christian Democrat agenda. And I say that because when I look across these 20 years and the arguments that were brought and the questions that were put and the criticisms that were made, shows that we have not done enough and shows that we have thought in too much of a silo mentality. We now today talk about the environment. We disentangle it from the economy. We talk about health as though it does not affect other sectors of our policy areas. We need to talk about migration. We were asked to talk about minorities. We were asked to talk about different cultures, different languages. I thought that was an amazing experience. The European Parliament was, let's say, one of its main proponents of this exercise. It continues to be, which is why we have now called for a convention to be launched. And I very much look forward to engaging in this time where citizens are asking us to do more, where they want more Europe. Remember, 5 years ago, we were discussing Brexit. We were discussing about the possibility of other countries leaving the European Union. Today, we are, I would say, in a luxurious, opportunistic moment of finding member countries that want to come to the European Union because they think that this is our home. So let's use that and not look away at the young people in all those countries and give them the opportunity that I was given when my generation was fighting in a very tough political campaign for me, my country, and 9 others on the same day, on the 1st of May 2004, to join the European Union.
Yeah. I should also mention, when we talk about youth, that you are the youngest ever president.
Well, I'm not
of the
so young
European
anymore, but
Parliament.
relatively speaking, yes, okay, I'm the youngest.
Well, I would like to ask you, let's talk a little bit about the European Parliament and the future of the European Parliament.
Sure.
We had a lot of democratic innovations in the last decade or so. We tried the Spitzenkandidaten process, to which the EPP remains committed, of course. We had the Conference on the Future of Europe. We have now a preliminary agreement on transnational lists. But the European Parliament is a parliament that still does not enjoy some of the traditional powers that democratic assemblies have enjoyed. Right of legislative initiative, for example, right to raise taxes. So how do you see the future of the European Parliament as an institution in the ecosystem of European democracy?
Well, on raising taxes, that's a competence issue, and we would also dispute the competences of other institutions to do that in a singular fashion. But on the right to legislative initiative and inquiry and scrutiny, this has been at the very top of the Parliament's prerogatives. It was also promised at the beginning of the mandate. We have a very long memory as a Parliament, and we will ensure that particularly next week we will be in Strasbourg, and there is a specific discussion in the plenary in the context of electoral and legislative reform that this is a promise that is kept. It is never easy, of course. I joined the Parliament from the Council, so I jumped from one institution to another, where you need to look at the different angles, which is great in a negotiation. We do it as legislators. We come from different angles and we find a compromise in the middle. I am optimistic when I attend the European Council. I see the prime ministers that are around the table. I see the discussion and the openness and honesty that there is around the table, and I am confident that the next few years will not be lost in the idea of getting the opportunities that can arise, unfortunately, from crises that we have just talked about, but also a future impending food crisis that will require immediate and effective responses. But I think that this is when Europe and the European People's Party and think tanks and organizations like the Martin Center can come in and say, this is the moment where we can lead. You are doing this, we are doing this in this context, but we need to not only do it between congresses and another. We have 2 golden years ahead of us that we cannot lose sight of or even miss 1 minute from.
Actually, thank you very much, and perhaps this leads me to my last question, which is about the EPP and more generally European political parties and European political foundations. We are speaking, of course, from the Congress of the EPP. European parties as the lifeblood of democracy at the national level. We know, because we work with them, how important European political parties are also at the European level. How do you see, how can we strengthen them? How do you see the future of European political parties going forward?
So I'm an elections geek, right? My doctorate was in electoral law. I love elections. I look at them, I study them. And I am very much fascinated by different processes in different countries, which reflect also historical and political contexts there. I think rather than talk about political parties, we need to talk about political participation. You see that our citizens are desperate for something to believe in. For some time, they looked away from political parties. They looked at movements, they looked at individuals, they looked at extremists, they looked at cynics, skeptics. I think when it comes to addressing the most difficult challenges that we will address over the next few months and years, they will look at who can deliver on their biggest concerns. And if it is political parties that can address them in a constructive, pragmatic, but also visionary way, then I think the result will automatically mean that the attractiveness will come back. It is not for granted. We cannot take it for granted. You need excitement, you need vision, you need a sense of we can win. But once you get there, I don't think people will talk about parties or other. They will say, I want to vote for that vision. And then we will not even have to discuss this question anymore.
Thank you very much. I think we have to wrap it up. I would like to really warmly thank you for your contribution, for your inspiring vision today. And of course, you know you can always count on the Martin Center to support you in this work of strengthening European democracy. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you very much, President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. Thank you, Federico. Thank you to all of our audience here on Spot and online. Don't forget to use the hashtag United4Europe when leaving your comments and impressions on our social media channels. See you in 30 minutes.